The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Naval Air Station Oceana as a battered Honda Civic pulled into a visitor spot near the main gate. The engine ticked as it cooled, oil burning somewhere deep in the exhaust system. From behind the wheel, Commander Elena Vasquez, though no one here would know that title, gathered her belongings with deliberate slowness. She wore faded jeans with a small tear at the knee, a loose gray t-shirt from a 5K charity run 3 years old, and white sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple ponytail. No makeup. No jewelry except a plain digital watch on her left wrist. She looked exactly like what her paperwork claimed. A contractor's administrative assistant, here to process supply requisitions for the next 6 months. The guard at the gate barely glanced up from his phone as she approached the window. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of confident slouch that came from 6 months of gate duty where nothing interesting ever happened. "ID and orders," he said, still scrolling through whatever had his attention. Elena slid her contractor badge through the slot. The name read Elena Vasquez, close enough to her real surname that she wouldn't stumble over it. Different enough that a casual records check wouldn't immediately flag her actual service history. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The guard scanned the badge, glanced at his screen, and waved her through without meeting her eyes. Building 7. Contractor processing. You can park in Lot C. Thank you, Elena said softly. Her voice carried a faint accent, Venezuelan by way of Miami, that she'd never quite lost despite 2 decades in uniform. As she drove through the gate, she caught sight of herself in the rear-view mirror. At 43, she could still pass for early 30s if the light was right. The scars were there if you knew where to look. A thin line along her left jawbone from shrapnel in Kandahar. A slight irregularity in her nose from a close-quarters fight in Mogadishu. The way her right shoulder sat just slightly different after it had been reconstructed following an ejection at sea. But people rarely looked that closely at contractors. Especially female contractors who dressed down and kept their heads low. Building 7 sat at the edge of the administrative complex, a squat gray structure that looked like it had been built in the 1972 and forgotten about shortly thereafter. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with that particular frequency that promised headaches by mid-afternoon. The linoleum floor was scuffed and stained. Motivational posters from 5 years ago curled at the edges on bulletin boards that no one bothered to update. The contractor processing office was on the 2nd floor. Elena climbed the stairs, never the elevator. Old habits, from tactical training, and found a reception desk staffed by a civilian administrator in her 50s, who looked up with the kind of tired smile that suggested she'd been doing this job far too long. "Can I help you?" Elena Vasquez. "I'm here for contractor orientation with Lieutenant Foster's supply office." The woman checked her computer, clicking through screens with practiced efficiency. Right. You're the new procurement assistant. Supply chain management. Requisitions. That sort of thing? Yes, ma'am. Well, Lieutenant Foster is out sick today, so you'll be reporting directly to Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. Well, you'll meet him. There was something in her tone, a warning, or maybe sympathy. His office is down the hall, room 214. Good luck, honey. Elena nodded and made her way down the corridor. Through open doors, she glimpsed the reality of the base. Sailors hunched over outdated computers. Filing cabinets overflowing with paperwork. Whiteboards covered in scribbled deadlines that had already passed. The infrastructure of military logistics. Always one crisis away from total collapse. Room 214's door was half open. Elena knocked lightly on the frame. "Yeah, what?" The voice was sharp, annoyed. She stepped inside. The office was organized chaos, stacks of requisition forms, supply catalogs, vendor contracts, and what looked like 6 months of unprocessed paperwork. Behind the desk sat Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, early 40s, with the kind of aggressive buzz cut and permanent scowl that telegraphed authority built on volume rather than respect. He didn't look up from his computer. You the new contractor? Yes, Chief. Elena Vasquez. Great. Another set of hands that doesn't know what they're doing. He finally glanced at her. His eyes, doing that quick assessment some men never learn to hide, sizing her up, dismissing her, categorizing her as not worth his full attention. You ever work military supply before? Some experience with government procurement systems, Elena said carefully. It was true she'd been on the requesting end of those systems for 20 years, leading strike missions that depended on precision logistics. But he didn't need to know that. Webb snorted. Some experience. Perfect. Listen, we're 6 months behind on requisitions. The new digital system is garbage, and everyone above me keeps asking why we can't get basic supplies delivered on time. You're here to make that problem go away. Think you can handle that? I'll do my best, Chief. Your best better be outstanding. Sweetheart. We don't have time for on-the-job training. He shoved a massive stack of folders across the desk. These are priority requisitions. They need to be entered into the system, cross-referenced with existing orders, and submitted by Friday. Today's Tuesday. Elena looked at the stack easily. 3 days of work for someone familiar with the system, probably 5 for Dave R. Someone learning it. Friday. Understood. Don't understand, just do it. Your desk is out there. He jerked his thumb toward the main office area. And try not to bother me with questions. If you can't figure it out, you probably shouldn't be here. She gathered the folders, their weight familiar, not the physical weight, but the weight of dismissal, of being underestimated. She'd carried that weight before. In flight school, when instructors assumed she'd wash out. In her first squadron, when senior pilots treated her like a diversity checkbox. In combat zones where allies questioned whether a woman could lead. Every time, she'd proven them wrong quietly, decisively, without fanfare. This would be no different. The main office held 6 desks arranged in 2 rows. 3 were occupied. 2 young sailors who couldn't have been more than 20. And a civilian contractor in his 30s who was arguing loudly on the phone about delayed shipments. Elena chose the empty desk in the corner, good sight lines to both doors, back to the wall. Another old habit, and set down her stack of requisitions. As she logged into the computer using her temporary credentials, she noticed the younger sailors watching her with barely concealed amusement. Fresh meat? One whispered to the other, not quite quietly enough. Give her 3 days. The other replied. Webb eats contractors for breakfast. They both laughed, then went back to their own work. Elena's fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up the procurement database. The interface was clunky, clearly designed by someone who'd never actually had to use it in a time-critical situation. But beneath the poor design, she could see the structure, the same basic framework that supported every military logistics system she'd ever encountered. She'd helped redesign parts of this system. Not this specific installation's version, but the Navy-wide protocols that underpinned it. 3 years ago, when she'd been serving on the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations Staff in the Pentagon, she'd spent 6 months embedded with a logistics reform team, learning the system from the inside out specifically so she could understand its weaknesses when she eventually took operational command. That knowledge was supposed to have prepared her for her next assignment, commander of Naval Air Station Oceana, one of the largest naval air stations on the East Coast. But the assignment had come with a condition from the CNO himself. This base has problems, Elena. Admiral Richardson had told her in his office, overlooking the Potomac. Systemic problems. Morale is in the toilet, supply chains are broken, there's waste and possibly corruption. The last 2 COs tried to fix it from the top down and got nowhere. I need someone who can see what's really happening at ground level before the brass show up and everyone starts covering their asses. You want me to go in undercover, she'd said. I want you to go in honest. No rank, no authority, no protection. Just you, with your eyes open, seeing what a base looks like when people think no one important is watching. 2 weeks, Elena. Give me 2 weeks of truth. Then we'll do the change of command ceremony, and you can fix it properly. She'd agreed, of course. Not because it was an order, though it was, but because after 23 years of service, she'd learned that the hardest problems were always the ones people hid from leadership. Elena spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon learning the contours of her temporary role. The requisition backlog was worse than Chief Webb had indicated, not 6 months behind, but closer to 8. Someone had been marking items as processed when they'd barely been reviewed, creating a cascade of delayed deliveries that rippled through every department on base. The two young sailors, Seaman Rodriguez and Seaman Jackson, largely ignored her except when they needed someone to laugh at. She overheard them placing bets on how long she'd last. Rodriguez gave her a week. Jackson was more generous. 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, if she was stubborn. The civilian contractor, whose name was Derek something, spent most of his time complaining on the phone or disappearing for extended smoke breaks. When Elena asked him a legitimate question about a vendor code, he'd rolled his eyes and said, "Figure it out yourself. That's why they hired you." By the time 1700 rolled around, most of the office had cleared out. Elena stayed, working through the requisitions with methodical precision. Each one told a story. An air wing that needed hydraulic components 3 months ago. A maintenance department waiting on basic tools. A communications section functioning with equipment that should have been replaced 2 years prior. This wasn't just inefficiency. This was a base slowly degrading, held together by the competence of individual sailors and maintainers who refused to give up despite a system that had stopped supporting them. At 1,830. Chief Webb emerged from his office, coffee mug in hand, clearly surprised to find anyone still working. "You're still here?" He didn't sound pleased about it, more suspicious. "Still working through the backlog, Chief. Just wanted to make some progress before tomorrow." He grunted. "Don't stay too late. They lock the building at 2000. "Understood." He lingered in the doorway, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then, "You know, most contractors come in here, thinking they're going to revolutionize the system. They last maybe a month, before they realize this place eats idealists for breakfast. Whatever experience you think you have with government work, this is different. This is military bureaucracy, at its finest or worst. Same thing." Elena looked up from her screen, meeting his eyes directly. "I'm not here to revolutionize anything, Chief. Just here to do the job. We'll see." He disappeared back into his office. And a few minutes later, she heard the door lock behind him as he left for the day. Alone in the office, Elena allowed herself a small smile. Webb was exactly the kind of middle manager she'd encountered throughout her career. Competent enough to hold his position. Cynical enough to have stopped believing change was possible. Defensive enough to treat every new person as a potential threat to his carefully constructed kingdom of managed chaos. He wasn't malicious. He was just tired. The real problem would reveal itself tomorrow, she suspected, when she started asking questions that threatened the comfortable narratives people had built to explain why things didn't work. Wednesday morning brought rain and traffic, which meant Elena arrived at 0745 instead of her planned 0730. The parking lot was fuller now, and she had to circle twice to find a spot in the far corner of Lot C. Chief Webb was already in his office when she arrived. Door closed, voice audible through the thin walls as he argued with someone on the phone. Elena logged in, pulled up yesterday's work, and continued processing requisitions. At 0830, a Navy lieutenant commander she hadn't met before swept into the office with the kind of energy that suggested he'd already had 3 cups of coffee and was working on his 4th. He was tall, late 30s, with the practiced confidence of someone who'd climbed the ranks on charisma as much as competence. "Where's Webb?" he called out to the room in general. Rodriguez jerked his thumb toward the closed office door. "On the phone, sir." Sounds heated. The lieutenant commander, his name tape read Morrison, noticed Elena for the first time. His gaze traveled from her civilian clothes to her desk, then back to her face with an expression that managed to be both appraising and dismissive simultaneously. "You the new contractor girl?" Elena felt the bristle of that word girl but kept her voice even. "Elena Vargas." "Yes, sir. Started yesterday." Great. Great. Listen. I need you to pull all requisitions related to hangar maintenance supplies from the last quarter. There's an inspection coming up and we need to show we've been proactive about facility maintenance. He said this while checking his phone, not quite looking at her. I can do that, sir. Do you need them in hard copy or digital format? Both. And I need them by this afternoon. Can you handle that? Elena glanced at her computer screen, where she had 43 priority requisitions still waiting to be processed from Chief Webb's pile. Sir, I'm currently working through a backlog that Chief Webb's backlog has been there for 6 months. It can wait another day. Morrison's tone sharpened slightly. This inspection is priority 1. Straight from the Admiral's office. So unless you want to explain to a flag officer why his inspection prep isn't ready. He let the threat hang in the air. I'll have it for you this afternoon, sir. Elena said quietly. Outstanding. See? You're getting the hang of it, already. He flashed a smile that probably worked on junior officers and started toward Webb's office. Then paused. Oh, and make sure it looks good. Neat, organized, professional. We're trying to show that this supply office actually has its act together. After he disappeared into Webb's office, Rodriguez leaned over toward Elena's desk. Good luck with that, he said, his voice carrying false sympathy. Morrison asks for the impossible and then acts like you're stupid when you can't deliver. And the Admiral he mentioned? Elena asked carefully. Probably Commander Anderson. He runs the air wing. Calls himself Admiral even though he's not. Rodriguez grinned. Everyone here plays rank games. You'll get used to it. Elena had already pulled up the maintenance requisitions system, her fingers moving with muscle memory through menus and subfolders. The data was there, but it was scattered across 3 different databases that didn't talk to each other properly. A classic military problem that she'd seen in every service. Within 20 minutes, she'd written a simple query that pulled all hangar maintenance requisitions from the last 90 days across all 3 systems, cross-referenced them by priority and status, and exported them into a clean spreadsheet with category summaries. By lunch, she had a professional report ready. 15 pages, clearly organized, with a cover memo summarizing key findings and highlighting significant gaps in the maintenance supply chain. When Morrison returned at 1,400, clearly expecting to find excuses rather than results, Elena handed him both digital and printed copies. He flipped through it, his expression shifting from expectation of disappointment to surprise to something that might have been suspicion. This is comprehensive, he said slowly. Where did you learn to format reports like this? Previous government contracting work, sir. He studied her for a moment longer than comfortable. What kind of government work? Various agencies. Mostly logistics and procurement. It wasn't a lie, technically. Just incomplete. Morrison tucked the report under his arm. Well, good job. Maybe we finally got a contractor who knows what they're doing. He paused at the door. Webb mentioned you stayed late yesterday. Don't make a habit of it. We don't pay overtime for contractors, and I don't want the union getting wind that we're squeezing people. After he left, Jackson rolled his chair over to Elena's desk. Okay, how did you do that? I've seen people spend a week trying to pull data from those systems. Just got lucky with the search parameters, Elena said, turning back to her screen. Uh-huh. Jackson didn't sound convinced. You sure you haven't done this before? I'm sure I've done a lot of things before, Elena replied, with a small smile. Most of them boring. By Friday, Elena had developed a routine. Arrive early, 0700, before Webb got in. Process the most critical requisitions first. Field impossible requests from officers who treated contractors like personal assistants. Stay late, when the office was quiet and she could really dig into the systemic issues without interruption. The patterns were becoming clear. Someone in the supply chain was manipulating delivery schedules to hide the fact that certain items never actually shipped. Requisitions marked as delivered were showing up as never received in end-user inventories. The delta between what was ordered and what arrived was significant enough to suggest either massive incompetence or deliberate fraud. Elena had seen similar patterns in deployed locations where local contractors were skimming supplies. But this was a domestic base with supposedly robust oversight. Someone here was either stealing or had become so comfortable with failure that they'd stopped noticing the gaps. Friday afternoon, she was deep in a particularly complex requisition chain, aircraft parts that had supposedly been delivered but weren't in any of the squadron inventories, when a voice behind her made her jump. "You always this focused?" She turned to find a Navy captain standing behind her desk, cup of coffee in hand, watching her with mild curiosity. His name tape read, Harrison, and his ribbons told the story of someone with combat deployments and serious credentials. "Sorry, sir. Didn't hear you come in." Clearly. Harrison pulled over Rodriguez's empty chair. The sailors had all disappeared for an extended lunch break and sat down. "You're the new contractor. Vargas, right?" "Yes, sir. Webb speaks highly of you." "Well, highly for Webb. He said you actually know what you're doing," which is basically a marriage proposal from him. Elena smiled despite herself. "I'm just trying to help clear the backlog." "So I've heard. Morrison showed me your maintenance report. Very thorough." Harrison's eyes were sharp, assessing. "Where'd you work before this?" "Various government agencies." "That's vague." "I sign a lot of NDAs, sir." He laughed. "Fair enough. Defense contractor background?" "Some." Harrison sipped his coffee, still studying her. "You know what's interesting? I've been in the Navy 22 years, and I can usually spot someone who's done this work before. The way they format reports, the language they use, how they prioritize information." He leaned forward slightly. "Your report read like something I'd get from a staff officer, not a contractor. Very military structure. Very precise." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I've worked with military personnel before." "You pick up the style." He didn't look entirely convinced. "Well, whatever your background, we're glad to have someone competent. This office has been a disaster for months." He stood up. "Keep up the good work, Vargas." As he walked away, Elena felt the first prickle of exposure. Harrison was smart, experienced. If she wasn't careful, someone like him would start asking questions that led to answers she wasn't ready to provide yet. The following Monday brought a new crisis. Elena arrived to find Chief Webb's office door open and voices raised inside. Webb and Morrison arguing about something. "I don't care what the inspection report says," Morrison was saying. "We need to show progress, not problems. The problems are real, sir. We can't just paperwork our way around. Watch me. That's what staff work is for. Making problems look manageable." Elena kept her head down and logged in. But she was listening carefully. The conversation continued, growing more heated, until Morrison stormed out, nearly colliding with her desk. "Vargas," he snapped. "I need you to pull every requisition that's been marked as complete in the last 60 days and compile them into a summary sheet. Make it look comprehensive. Lots of line items. I need it to show we've been aggressively addressing supply issues." Elena hesitated. "Sir, if you want an accurate picture of what's been delivered versus what's still pending, I want what I asked for. Complete requisitions. Finished. Done. Delivered." His voice carried an edge now. "Can you do that or not?" "Yes, sir. I can pull that data." "Good. By tomorrow morning." After he left, Webb emerged from his office, his face tight with frustration. He saw Elena and shook his head. "Don't say it." "I wasn't going to say anything, Chief. Morrison's playing the game. He needs good numbers for the inspection. So he's going to create good numbers whether they're real or not." Webb sat on the edge of her desk. An unusual gesture of informality. "You've been here, what, a week and a half? About that. You've already figured out the systems are broken. I can see it in the questions you ask. The way you follow the data trails. You're smart enough to know that half the complete requisitions in our database never actually got delivered to the end users." Elena said nothing. waiting. Morrison knows it too, Webb continued. But he's up for promotion, and he can't have a failed inspection on his record. So he'll make the numbers work on paper. And when the squadrons still don't have their parts 6 months from now, it'll be someone else's problem. That's not how a supply chain should work, Elena said quietly. No kidding. But that's how this one works. He stood up, heading back to his office. Pull Morrison what he wants. Make it look pretty. That's the job. Elena spent the rest of the day compiling the data Morrison requested. But she also created a second file, one that cross-referenced the complete requisitions against actual delivery confirmations from the receiving units. The gap was stark. Nearly 40% of the items marked as complete had never actually been delivered. It was the kind of discrepancy that would get people relieved of duty if it came to light. But bringing it to light meant going around Morrison, around Webb, around the entire chain of command to someone who had the authority and willingness to act. Tuesday morning, Elena delivered Morrison's report. Clean, professional, showing exactly what he wanted to see. He barely glanced at it before passing it up his own chain. Satisfied. But Elena kept the second file. She'd need it soon. That afternoon, she was working through a particularly tangled requisition aircraft hydraulic components that had been on order for 7 months when she noticed something odd. The vendor listed was a company she recognized from her time at the Pentagon, a defense contractor that had been flagged 2 years ago for overbilling and delivery failures. They shouldn't have been approved for new contracts. Elena pulled up the vendor approval database, going deeper than she probably should have with her contractor credentials. The company's status showed active with a recent contract renewal signature from Captain Morrison. Her fingers stopped moving on the keyboard. This wasn't just incompetence. This was potentially criminal. She sat back in her chair, thinking. If she raised this now, as a contractor, it would go nowhere. Webb would tell her to mind her own business. Morrison would have her credentials pulled. She'd lose her access before she could map the full extent of the problem. But if she waited 2 more days until Thursday, when she was scheduled to transfer out, and Admiral Richardson would arrive for the change of command ceremony, she could hand over everything she'd found to the incoming CO with full authority to act. The incoming CO being herself. Something wrong? Elena looked up to find Captain Harrison standing by her desk again, that same curious expression on his face. No, sir. Just trying to track down a vendor issue. Harrison glanced at her screen, and she saw his eyes narrow slightly as he recognized the company name. That contractor's been problematic, he said carefully. I've raised concerns about them before. What happened? Nothing. Got told to stay in my lane. He looked at her directly. You finding something interesting in their records? Elena made a decision. Sir, if I did find something, hypothetically, who would be the right person to bring it to? Harrison pulled up a chair, his voice dropping. Hypothetically? You'd need someone senior enough to have oversight authority but not invested in maintaining the status quo. That's a narrow window on this base. He paused. The new CO starts Thursday. Admiral Elena Vasquez. I served with her in the Pacific. She's got a reputation for zero tolerance on corruption. If you had something real, she'd be the one to bring it to. Elena kept her expression neutral even as she noted the irony. I'll keep that in mind, sir. Good. Harrison stood up. And Vargas? Be careful. If there is something fishy with that contractor, the people protecting them won't appreciate someone digging around. After he left, Elena sat quietly, her mind working through the implications. Harrison knew something was wrong. He'd tried to report it and been shut down. How many others had noticed the problems but felt powerless to act? That evening, Elena stayed late again. This time, she wasn't just processing requisitions. She was building a case. Vendor contracts, delivery discrepancies, approval signatures, patterns of fraud that went back at least 3 years. The office was empty except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of aircraft on the flight line. Elena worked with focused intensity, compiling evidence that would justify immediate investigations, potential court-martials, and a complete overhaul of the supply chain oversight process. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were right behind her. Working late again? I see. Elena's hand moved instinctively, not toward a weapon she didn't have, but in a defensive position that was pure muscle memory from close-quarters combat training. She forced herself to relax as she turned to find Chief Webb standing there, his expression unreadable. "Chief, didn't hear you come in." Clearly. He moved closer, looking at her screen. Elena had been careful. The evidence file was closed, only the standard requisition database visible. But Webb's eyes were sharp. "You know, it's funny. Most contractors do the minimum and get out at 1,700 on the dot. But you stay late. You dig deeper than you need to. You ask questions that go beyond your job description. Just trying to do thorough work, Chief." Webb, perched on the edge of the desk beside hers. "I've been doing this job for 11 years. I've seen a lot of contractors come through. You're different." "How so?" "You move wrong." Elena felt a chill. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Your posture. The way you scan rooms when you enter. How you always position yourself with your back to a wall. The way you type, not hunting and pecking like most admin people. But fast. Efficient. Like someone who's done tactical reports under time pressure." Webb's voice was thoughtful, not accusatory. "You carry yourself like military, but you're wearing civilian clothes. So either your former service trying to stay connected, or..." He trailed off. "Or what, Chief? Or you're still active duty, and you're here for a reason nobody's told me about." He stood up. "I'm not asking you to confirm or deny. But if you are here for a reason, if you're digging into things that need digging into, then you should know. Morrison's not the only one with dirty hands. The rot goes deeper than one captain approving bad contracts." Elena studied him carefully. "If that's true, hypothetically, why are you telling me?" "Because I'm tired," Webb said simply. "Tired of watching good sailors work their asses off while the system fails them. Tired of covering for officers who care more about their promotion than their people. Tired of being part of the problem." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The new Admiral starts in 2 days. Maybe she'll actually fix things. Or maybe she'll be just like the last 2 CEOs, all talk, no action." After he left, Elena sat in the quiet office, her heart rate slowly returning to normal. Webb had seen through her cover, or at least suspected something. But instead of exposing her, he'd essentially given her permission to keep digging. How many others on this base were waiting for someone to finally hold the line? She returned to her evidence file, working through the night. Wednesday morning arrived with unseasonable heat and humidity that made the air feel thick enough to drink. Elena had gone home at 0200, slept for 3 hours, and returned by 0630. Her eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but her mind was sharp. One more day in this role, then everything would change. She just logged in when the first sign of trouble rippled through the building, raised voices from the administrative wing, footsteps moving faster than usual, the particular tension that preceded bad news. Rodriguez burst into the supply office, his face pale. "Webb, we've got a problem." Chief Webb emerged from his office, coffee in hand. "What kind of problem?" "Squadron maintenance just called. They've got aircraft grounded 7F. A-18 seconds can't fly because they don't have critical hydraulic components. Components that were supposedly delivered 3 weeks ago." Webb's face went rigid. "That's impossible. I personally signed off on that delivery confirmation." "Well, maintenance doesn't have them. And there's an inspection team arriving from Norfolk in..." Rodriguez checked his watch. 4 hours. If they see 7 birds grounded for lack of parts. He didn't need to finish. Everyone in the room understood. A major inspection with aircraft grounded for basic maintenance issues would trigger investigations, command reviews, potentially relief of the CO and senior staff. Careers would end. Morrison arrived 30 seconds later, moving so fast, he was almost running. "Please tell me I didn't just hear what I think I heard." The hydraulic components aren't there, sir, Webb said flatly. The squadron says they never received them. That's impossible. I saw the delivery confirmation myself. You showed it to me. I'm aware, sir. I'm just telling you what maintenance reported. Morrison's face flushed red. Then someone lost them, or misplaced them, or, he spun toward the office staff. You. All of you. I want every storage area. Every supply closet. Every goddamn broom cupboard on this base searched. Those components have to be somewhere. But Elena was already pulling up records on her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She traced the requisition chain. Order placed 8 months ago. Approved. Sent to the vendor. Marked as shipped. Marked as delivered. Confirmation signed by. Her blood went cold. The delivery confirmation had been signed by someone in the supply office. But the components had been shipped to the wrong address, not to squadron maintenance, but to a civilian warehouse 40 miles away. A warehouse owned by a shell company that connected back to the same problematic defense contractor she'd been investigating. This wasn't incompetence. This was theft on a massive scale. Sir? Elena said quietly. But Morrison was still shouting instructions to the staff, sending them scrambling to search areas that Elena knew would be empty. Sir, she said louder. Not now, Vargas. If you're not searching, you're useless. The components were never delivered to the squadron, sir. They were diverted. The room went silent. Morrison turned slowly. What did you say? Elena stood up, moving to where her computer screen was visible to the entire office. The delivery confirmation shows they were sent to an alternate address. A civilian warehouse in Newport News. She pulled up the shipping records. The company that operates that warehouse is connected to Stop. Morrison's voice was sharp. Whatever you think you've found, you're wrong. You're a contractor who's been here less than 2 weeks. You don't have the full picture. I have the shipping records. Sir. The vendor database. The financial connections. I said stop. Morrison's face was now a dangerous shade of red. You're overstepping your authority, and you're interfering with official business. Webb, get her credentials pulled. She's done here. Webb stood frozen, clearly torn. Chief. That's an order. Remove her access and escort her off base. Now. But Captain Harrison had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? Morrison turned, slightly thrown by the senior officer's presence. Sir, we have a situation with missing components. And this contractor is making unfounded allegations about. She's right, Elena said, her voice cutting through Morrison's explanation with a command authority that made everyone in the room snap their attention to her. The components were deliberately diverted as part of a theft ring that's been operating on this base for at least 3 years. And the inspection team arriving from Norfolk isn't here for a routine visit, they're here because someone flagged the discrepancies in requisition records. Morrison's eyes narrowed. How would you possibly know that? Elena met his gaze steadily. Because I'm the one who flagged them. 2 months ago. Before I arrived here. The room seemed to tilt. Everyone was staring at her now. Rodriguez and Jackson with confusion. Webb with dawning realization. Harrison with something that might have been satisfaction. Morrison with barely contained fury. What are you talking about? Morrison demanded. You're a contractor. You don't have access to. I'm not a contractor. Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle. I'm Commander Elena Vasquez. As of tomorrow, I'm Admiral Elena Vasquez, and I'm your new commanding officer. I've been here for 2 weeks conducting an undercover assessment of this base's logistics operations. And what I've found is grounds for criminal prosecution. The silence that followed was absolute. Morrison's face drained of color. Webb slowly lowered himself into a chair, his expression somewhere between shock and vindication. Rodriguez and Jackson looked like they'd been struck by lightning. Harrison, after a moment, straightened to attention and saluted. Admiral. Elena returned the salute, then turned to Morrison. Captain Morrison, you are hereby relieved of your duties pending investigation into contractor fraud, theft of government property, and falsification of official records. You will surrender your credentials and report to the base security office immediately. You can't. Morrison started, but his voice faltered. This is entrapment. You lied about who you were. I conducted an authorized investigation under the direct orders of the Chief of Naval Operations, Elena replied. Everything I observed was in the course of normal operations. Everything I documented is admissible, and everything you did was illegal. Morrison's hands clenched into fists, but he was smart enough, or scared enough, not to do anything more than glare. This isn't over. You're right, Elena said. It's not. Chief Webb, call the Master-at-Arms. I want Captain Morrison escorted to security and placed under restriction until NCIS arrives. Webb was already reaching for his phone, his voice steady as he made the call. When he hung up, he looked at Elena with something like awe. How long have you known? About the vendor fraud? Since Friday. About the extent of Morrison's involvement? Since last night. Elena turned to the computer, pulling up the comprehensive file she'd been building. The components we need are in that warehouse in Newport News. Captain Harrison, I need you to coordinate with local police to secure that location immediately. Treat it as a crime scene. Yes, ma'am. Harrison was already on his phone, moving toward the hallway. Elena looked at Rodriguez and Jackson, who were still frozen in shock. You two. I need you to pull every requisition Morrison approved in the last 2 years. Cross-reference them against actual deliveries. I want to know the full scope of what's been stolen. Ma'am, Rodriguez stammered. We thought you were just a clerk who didn't know what she was doing. Elena's smile was thin. I know. That was the point. Now get moving. We have 4 hours before that inspection team arrives, and I intend to have answers for them. The 2 sailors scrambled to their workstations. Webb approached her, his voice low. I knew something was off about you. But Admiral? Jesus, ma'am. I called you sweetheart on your first day. And I've been called worse by better men. Elena replied without rancor. You were doing your job, Chief. A job that was deliberately made impossible by people above you. That ends today. 2 Master-at-Arms arrived to escort Morrison out. He went without further protest. But the look he shot Elena promised that he'd fight this with every lawyer and connection he had. She watched him go, feeling nothing but the cold certainty that she'd done what needed to be done. But the immediate crisis wasn't over. 7 aircraft were still grounded, and an inspection team was still inbound. Elena pulled out her personal phone, the one she'd kept powered off and hidden for 2 weeks, and dialed a number she'd memorized years ago. Captain Reyes, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Reyes. It's Vasquez. I need a tactical response team, an evidence collection unit at a civilian warehouse in Newport News within the hour. I'm sending you the address now. We've got stolen military property, possibly millions in fraud, and I need it secured before anyone realizes we're on to them. Vasquez? I heard you were you're at Oceana? I thought you were taking command tomorrow. I am. Right now I'm dealing with the mess I'm about to inherit. How fast can you move? For you? We'll be there in 45 minutes. Elena ended the call and turned to find the entire office staring at her. The young sailors, the civilian contractors who'd wandered in to see what the commotion was about. Even the administrative staff from other offices who'd been drawn by the drama. She took a breath, feeling the weight of command settle onto her shoulders in a way it never quite had before. Not when she'd led her first fighter squadron. Not when she'd commanded a carrier air wing in the Pacific. This was different, more personal, more immediate. These were her people now. And they'd been failed by their leadership for far too long. Listen up, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the office. I know you all have questions. I know this is confusing and probably concerning. Here's what you need to know. For the past 2 weeks, I've been working alongside you, observing this base's operations from the ground level. What I've found is both worse and better than expected. She paused, making eye contact with several faces. Worse, Because the corruption and incompetence go deeper than anyone realized. Better, because despite a system that was actively working against you, most of you kept doing your jobs with dedication and integrity. You kept this base functioning when you had every reason to give up. Webb stood a little straighter. Rodriguez and Jackson exchanged glances, something like pride beginning to replace their shock. Starting tomorrow, things change. We're going to fix the supply chain. We're going to hold people accountable. And we're going to remember that our job is to support the sailors who defend this country, not to play political games or pad our own records. Elena's voice hardened slightly. If you've been part of the problem, you have one chance to come forward before the investigations start. If you've been trying to do the right thing and been blocked, your concerns will finally be heard. And, if you're just trying to do your job and go home to your families, you're going to find that a lot easier in the coming months. A hand went up one of the civilian contractors Elena didn't know well. Ma'am, what about the inspection team? What about them? We're not going to be ready. 7 birds grounded. The supply records are a mess. Morrison's arrest is going to raise questions. Good. Elena interrupted. Let them see exactly what they came to see. A base that's been operating under impossible conditions because of criminal negligence at the leadership level. The people who should be worried about this inspection are already in custody or about to be. The rest of you? You're going to tell the truth. That's all I've ever asked of anyone under my command. Her phone buzzed. A text from Reyes. Team en route. Warehouse secured. You're not going to believe what we found. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Chief Webb, you're acting supply officer until I can assign someone permanent. Captain, Harrison is now my interim XO. The two of you are going to coordinate with NCIS and get those components back to squadron maintenance. I want at least 5 of those birds flight ready by the time the inspection team arrives. Ma'am, that's only 4 hours. Webb started. Then I suggest you stop talking and start moving. Webb's expression transformed. For the first time since she'd arrived, he looked energized, purposeful. Ma'am. Rodriguez. Jackson. You're with me. We're going to Newport News. As the supply office erupted into controlled chaos, Elena felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Captain Harrison, his expression serious. That was one hell of a gamble, Admiral. Going undercover like that. It was the only way to see the truth, Elena replied. From the top, everyone smiles and says yes, sir. From the bottom, you see what's really happening. And what if Morrison had been armed? What if he'd decided to do something stupid when you revealed yourself? Elena's smile was cold. Then he would have learned that before I was an admiral, I was a fighter pilot who completed 3 combat tours and trained in close-quarters combat. I wasn't worried. Harrison laughed despite the tension. I believe it. You know, I told the staff yesterday that the new CO had a reputation for zero tolerance on corruption. I didn't realize you'd already been building the case from the inside. Corruption thrives in darkness. Elena said. I just turned on the lights. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. The warehouse in Newport News was a nondescript building in an industrial park, the kind of place that could house anything from furniture storage to automotive parts. NCIS agents swarmed the location like ants, photographing, cataloging, documenting everything. Elena arrived with Captain Harrison 90 minutes after her phone call to Reyes. She'd changed into her service uniform the first time in 2 weeks she'd worn anything that identified her rank, and the transformation was startling. The woman who'd been dismissed as a clerk now moved with unmistakable authority, sailors and agents alike stepping aside as she approached. Special Agent Maria Reyes met her at the entrance, tablet in hand, her expression grim. Admiral, you're going to want to see this. Inside the warehouse, stacked on industrial shelving, were military components worth millions. Aircraft parts, communications equipment, medical supplies, tools, electronics, everything bore military markings. Everything had been requisitioned, shipped, and marked as delivered. And none of it had ever reached its intended destination. How much are we talking about? Elena asked quietly. Preliminary estimate. North of $15 million over 3 years. Reyes replied. Morrison wasn't working alone. We've identified at least 4 other officers involved in various bases along the East Coast. This is bigger than Oceana. Elena walked the aisles, her trained eye cataloging the inventory. She recognized components from her own requisitions when she'd commanded squadrons parts they'd waited months for, while being told they were backordered or on delay. They'd been here the whole time, stolen and warehoused, probably to be resold at marked-up prices to desperate units or even foreign buyers. The hydraulic components for my F.A. 18 seconds? She asked. Reyes pointed to a shelf near the back. Right there. Still in their original packaging. Never even opened. Elena felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. She thought of the pilots who'd been grounded, the missions that couldn't be flown, the training cycles that had been disrupted, all because someone saw military equipment as a profit opportunity rather than tools that kept sailors alive. I want every person who touched these important contracts identified, she said, her voice steady despite her fury. Every signature, every approval, every facilitation. And I want them prosecuted to the fullest extent of military and civilian law. Already on it, Reyes assured her. Morrison's phone records alone are damning. He was coordinating with the vendor directly, using encrypted apps. Apparently thought he was being clever. Harrison had been silent, walking the warehouse with the expression of someone seeing a nightmare made real. Admiral, if this is happening here, how many other bases are compromised? That's what the CNO is going to want to know, Elena replied. This is going to trigger a Navy-wide investigation. Every supply chain, every vendor contract, every delivery confirmation is going to be scrutinized. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Admiral Richardson, the Chief of Naval Operations. Sir, she answered. Elena, I just got a call from NCIS saying you've uncovered a major procurement fraud case. Are you telling me your undercover assessment found something this big? Yes. Sir. Minimum $15 million in stolen equipment. Multiple officers involved across several installations. I have one of the primary suspects in custody, and NCIS is currently securing the evidence. There was a pause on the other end. I sent you in there to identify inefficiencies and morale issues. You found a criminal conspiracy. Sometimes, they're the same thing, sir. The inefficiencies were deliberate. The morale issues were the result of good sailors being undermined by corrupt leadership. Another pause. Your change of command ceremony is scheduled for 1000 tomorrow. Yes, sir. Make it 0800. I want you in official command before this news breaks publicly. And Elena? Well done. This is exactly why I sent you in there. After the call ended, Elena stood in the warehouse, surrounded by the physical evidence of betrayal, feeling the weight of what came next. Tomorrow, she'd take command openly. But the real work, rebuilding trust, fixing systems, holding the line, that work would take months, maybe years. Chief Webb arrived with a team of maintainers from the squadron, their faces hardening as they saw the shelves of stolen equipment. One young sailor, couldn't have been more than 20, walked directly to the hydraulic components and just stood there, staring. We waited 8 months for these, he said quietly. 8 months. We had birds down. Pilots couldn't train. And Chief Martinez kept telling us they were backordered. He believed it because that's what the system told him. The sailor turned to Elena, his eyes bright with anger. Do you know how that feels, ma'am? Being told you're not doing your job because you don't have the tools, when the tools were right here the whole time. I do know, Elena said. Because I've been that pilot, that maintainer, that frustrated sailor who couldn't understand why the system kept failing. That's why I'm here. That's why this pipeline ends now. Webb stepped forward, his voice rough with emotion. Admiral, permission to speak freely? Granted. I've been in the Navy 19 years. I've served under 8 different commanding officers. Most of them gave speeches about honor and integrity and taking care of sailors. But I've never seen one actually go undercover as a contractor to understand what we're dealing with. I've never seen one willing to be dismissed, mocked, and underestimated just to see the truth. He snapped to attention and saluted. Whatever you need from me, whatever it takes to fix this, you have it. No questions asked. Elena returned the salute, moved despite herself. What I need, Chief, is for you to keep being the kind of NCO who tells the truth even when it's uncomfortable, who fights for his people even when the system is against him. I didn't learn what was happening here from official reports. I learned it from people like you who kept caring when everyone else had given up. Around the side warehouse, other sailors and agents had stopped their work, listening. Elena hadn't intended to give a speech, but she realized they needed to hear this. For years, this base has been failing, she continued. Not because the sailors were incompetent, not because the systems were impossible, but because corrupt leaders made it fail so they could profit. They stole from you. They stole your time, your resources, your faith in the chain of command. And they thought they'd get away with it because no one would look hard enough to see what was really happening. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces watching her. I looked. I saw. And now we fix it. Every person in this room is part of that solution. When we walk out of here with this evidence, we're not just solving a crime. We're proving that the Navy takes care of its own, that corruption doesn't win, that the truth matters. The warehouse was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then, from somewhere in the back, a sailor began to clap. Others joined slowly at first, then building into applause that echoed off the metal walls. Elena felt her throat tighten. This was why she'd joined the Navy 23 years ago. Not for the rank or the ribbons or the prestige. For moments like this, when you proved to people that their service mattered, that someone was watching their backs, that doing the right thing actually meant something. Load it up, she ordered. Every component on these shelves goes back to Oceana. We have aircraft to get flight ready and an inspection to pass. Let's move. The energy in the warehouse transformed from shock and anger into purposeful action. Sailors and agents worked together, loading equipment onto trucks, cross-referencing inventory lists, documenting chain of custody. What had been stolen property became mission-critical supplies heading back to where they belonged. Captain Harrison approached Elena as she supervised the loading. Admiral, you realize, this is going to make waves all the way to Washington. Good. It should. Morrison has friends, officers who benefited from these schemes. They're going to fight back. Elena's smile was hard. Let them try. I have the CNO's backing, NCIS evidence, and a warehouse full of stolen equipment. More importantly, I have sailors who are ready to tell the truth about what they've endured. This isn't a fight they can win. Harrison nodded slowly. I'm glad you're here, ma'am. This base has needed someone like you for a long time. This base needed someone who would listen. Elena corrected. The sailors knew what was happening. They just needed a commander who would believe them and act. By the time they returned to Oceana, word had spread through the base like wildfire. The mysterious contractor who'd been working in supply wasn't a contractor at all. She was their new CO, and she'd just broken open a major criminal case by working alongside them for 2 weeks. Sailors lined the route, from the main gate to the supply warehouse, watching as the trucks rolled in carrying the recovered equipment. Some saluted. Some just stared in disbelief. But all of them were talking, processing what it meant that their admiral had been among them, seen what they saw, and taken action. In the squadron ready room, pilots who'd been grounded for months gathered around the television as the local news broke the story. Major procurement fraud uncovered at Naval Air Station Oceana. Sources say a Navy admiral conducted an undercover investigation to expose the scheme. One young pilot, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who'd been Elena's wingman years ago in the Pacific, stared at the screen and then started laughing. No way. No way, that's her. Her squadron mate looked confused. You know the new Admiral. I flew with her when she was a commander. She's a legend. Best tactical mind I've ever seen. But this? Chen shook her head in amazement. Going undercover as a contractor? That's next level. That's not just catching bad guys. That's making sure you understand the problem before you try to fix it. Think she'll actually change things? Chen's smile was certain. If Admiral Vasquez says something is going to change, you can take that to the bank. She doesn't make promises she can't keep. By nightfall, Elena was exhausted. She'd been awake for nearly 22 hours, coordinating with NCIS, briefing the CNO, overseeing the recovery of stolen equipment, and managing the cascade of questions from officers across the base who suddenly realized their new CO wasn't just competent, she was formidable. She sat in the temporary office that had been assigned to her, still in her service uniform, working through the mountain of paperwork that came with exposing a criminal conspiracy. Her personal phone buzzed with messages from former colleagues and friends who'd seen the news. Most were congratulatory. A few were warnings. You've made powerful enemies. Watch your back. Elena wasn't worried about enemies. She'd made plenty over her career by refusing to compromise on integrity. What concerned her was whether she could fix the systemic problems quickly enough to prevent good sailors from becoming casualties of a broken system. A knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in. Chief Webb entered, still in his working uniform, looking as tired as she felt. Admiral, the squadron reports that 5 of the 7 grounded aircraft are now flight-ready. The remaining 2 will be up by morning. Outstanding work, Chief. That's not why I'm here, ma'am. Webb closed the door behind him, his expression serious. I need to tell you something. About Morrison. About how this whole thing worked. Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. I'm listening. Webb sat down heavily. 3 years ago, when Morrison first got assigned here, he approached me. Said he had a way to make the supply chain more efficient. Streamline approvals, work directly with certain vendors who could guarantee faster delivery. He made it sound legitimate, like we'd be helping the squadrons get what they needed quicker. But you didn't buy it. Elena said quietly. I didn't buy it, Webb confirmed. Something felt off. The way he emphasized certain vendors. How he wanted to bypass standard oversight procedures. I told him I wasn't interested. I'd do things by the book or not at all. What happened? He made my life hell. Routed every problem through my office. Blamed me for delays that weren't my fault. Made sure senior leadership heard that the supply issues were because Webb was a dinosaur who couldn't adapt to modern procurement methods. Webb's jaw tightened. I almost resigned. Would have. Except I knew if I left, there'd be no one watching the supply chain who actually gave a damn about doing it right. Elena felt a surge of respect for this man who'd held the line when it would have been easier to quit. You stayed. You kept documenting the lawn irregularities. You kept fighting, even when no one was listening. I stayed, because that's what you do, Webb said simply. You don't abandon your post just because the battle is hard. But I want you to know. Admiral, I tried to report it. Sent memos to the previous CO. Raised concerns in staff meetings. Got told I was being paranoid, that Morrison was a rising star, and I was just threatened by his innovative approaches. The previous CO was either incompetent or complicit, Elena said flatly. That's why he's no longer here. That's why I am. Webb nodded. There's more. Lieutenant Commander James Parker. In the Aviation Maintenance Department. Senior Chief Lisa Torres. In Communications. Petty Officer First Class David Zhang. In Security. They all saw pieces of what was happening. They all tried to report it. They all got shut down or ignored. I need to talk to each of them, Elena said, making notes. They're witnesses. More importantly, they're the kind of people I need in leadership positions, people with integrity who won't stay silent when something's wrong. There's a group of them, Webb continued. Mostly senior enlisted and mid-grade officers. We started meeting informally about 6 months ago. Comparing notes. trying to figure out how deep the corruption went. We called ourselves the Reality Check Committee because official channels wouldn't acknowledge reality. Elena leaned forward. Chief, I want you to gather that group. Tomorrow night, after the change of command ceremony. Private meeting. I want to hear everything they know. Everything they've documented. Those are going to be the people who help me rebuild this base the right way. Webb's expression transformed with something like hope. We thought we'd be stuck dealing with this until we retired, ma'am. Just surviving until we could get out with our pensions intact. Survival isn't the mission, Elena replied. Excellence is the mission. Integrity is the mission. Taking care of sailors is the mission. And we're going to remember that starting tomorrow. After Webb left, Elena sat alone with her thoughts. The change of command ceremony was in 12 hours. By noon tomorrow, she'd officially be responsible for every sailor, aircraft, and operation on this base. The weight of that responsibility had never felt heavier or more important. Her phone rang again. This time it was Admiral Richardson. Elena, I've been getting calls from every flag officer on the East Coast. Half of them are congratulating me on your investigation. The other half are asking if I've lost my mind sending an admiral undercover like some kind of spy novel. And what are you telling them, sir? That I sent the right person to do a hard job, and she exceeded all expectations. The Secretary of the Navy wants a full briefing tomorrow afternoon. CNN is running the story on the national news. And Morrison's lawyer is already claiming entrapment. It's not entrapment to conduct an 27 pertusef authorized investigation. Sir. I know that. You know that. But this is going to be a fight, Elena. Morrison's connected. The contractors he worked with have lobbyists. There are officers who benefited from this scheme who are going to try to muddy the waters. Let them try, Elena said. I have evidence. I have witnesses. And I have the moral high ground. Richardson's chuckle came through the line. You know what? I think you do. All right, Admiral. Your ceremony is at 0800. The base is yours. Fix it. Yes, sir. After the call ended, Elena stood and walked to the window. Outside, the base was settling into night routine. Lights glowed in the barracks. Aircraft sat silent on the flight line. In the distance, she could see sailors walking between buildings, finishing their workday, heading home, or to the mess hall, or to whatever activities filled their off-duty hours. These were her people, now. Every one of them. She thought about the young sailor in the warehouse who'd waited 8 months for hydraulic components. About Chief Webb who'd held the line when everyone else had given up. About the pilots who'd been grounded. The maintainers who'd been blamed for failures that weren't their fault. The supply clerks who'd worked impossible hours trying to make a broken system function. Tomorrow, she'd stand in front of them in her dress whites and accept command officially. They'd salute her stars and ribbons. They'd hear her speech about readiness and excellence and naval tradition. But they'd also remember that before any of that, she'd been willing to dress in jeans and a t-shirt and sit at a desk beside them, processing requisitions and listening to their frustrations. She'd been willing to be dismissed and mocked and underestimated because seeing the truth mattered more than protecting her ego. That's what leadership actually meant. Not the authority to give orders, but the humility to understand what those orders would cost the people who carried them out. Elena pulled her dress uniform from the garment bag in the corner and began preparing for tomorrow. The stars on her shoulders gleamed under the office lights, symbols of authority earned through decades of service. But they were just symbols. The real authority came from the trust she'd built with every sailor on this base by proving, day after day, that their welfare mattered more than politics, careerism, or corruption. Morning broke clear and bright over Naval Air Station Oceana, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift after weeks of rain and storms. By 0700, the parade ground was already filling with sailors in their dress uniforms, forming ranks with practiced precision. The bass band tuned their instruments. Flags snapped in the morning breeze. The whole installation had turned out for what everyone now knew would be a historic change of command ceremony. Elena arrived at 0730. Driven in an official staff car, a stark contrast to her battered Honda Civic from 2 weeks ago. She wore her dress white uniform, every ribbon and medal in perfect alignment. The stars on her shoulder boards caught the sunlight, undeniable markers of the authority she was about to assume. But she didn't go directly to the ceremony. Instead, she made one stop first. The supply office was already bustling with activity, sailors working through the reorganization of inventory that had returned from the Newport News warehouse. Elena walked in unannounced, and the room gradually went silent as people realized who had entered. Rodriguez saw her first and shot to attention. Admiral on deck. Everyone in the office snapped to attention, their salutes sharp and uniform. Elena returned the salute, then said quietly, "As you were." She walked through the office, seeing the familiar desks and computer screens where she'd spent 2 weeks. Her temporary desk in the corner had been cleared, but someone, probably Webb, had left a small card propped against the monitor. She picked it up. In neat handwriting, it read, "Thank you for seeing us. The supply team." Elena tucked the card into her pocket, then turned to address the room. "I wanted to come here first, before the ceremony, to say something. In about 30 minutes, I'm going to officially take command of this base. There will be speeches and salutes and all the formal traditions that come with a change of command. But this," she gestured to the office, "this is where I learned what it really means to command NAS Oceana." The sailors watched her intently. "You didn't know who I was. You had no reason to treat me with any special consideration. And in those 2 weeks, I saw exactly what kind of people you are. I saw sailors who stayed late to help each other. I saw NCOs who refused to compromise on integrity even when it cost them personally. I saw young sailors trying to do excellent work with inadequate resources and still somehow succeeding." She paused, meeting individual gazes. "When I stand on that parade ground in 20 minutes, the authority comes from these stars. But the right to lead you comes from what I saw here. You've already taught me more about this base than any briefing book ever could. And I hope you'll continue to do that, to tell me the truth, to bring me problems, to hold me accountable for making this place what it should be." Chief Webb stepped forward, his voice gruff. "Admiral, permission to say something?" "Granted. We've had 5 commanding officers in the last 7 years. Every one of them gave speeches about open doors and caring about sailors. But none of them actually meant it. They wanted to hear what made them look good, not what was actually happening." Webb squared his shoulders. "You sat at that desk for 2 weeks. You processed our requisitions. You heard us complain. You saw us at our worst, tired, frustrated, cynical. And you didn't judge us for it. You understood why we felt that way. That's not something a star gives you, ma'am. That's something you earned." A murmur of agreement rippled through the office. Petty Officer Second Class Jackson, one of the young sailors who'd bet Elena wouldn't last a week, raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, can I ask a question?" "Of course. Why did you do it? You're an admiral. You could have just shown up, taken command, ordered people to fix things. Why risk people not respecting you? Why put yourself through getting dismissed and mocked?" Elena considered the question carefully. Because respect based on rank alone is fragile. It disappears the moment the rank goes away. But respect based on shared experience, on proven integrity, on understanding what people actually deal with, that's permanent. "I could order you to follow me. But I'd rather you choose to follow me because you believe I understand your challenges and will fight for you." Jackson nodded slowly. "That makes sense, ma'am. Plus," Elena added with a slight smile, "I learned more about supply chain management in 2 weeks as a clerk than I did in 6 months at the Pentagon. There's something to be said for getting your hands dirty." That earned a few genuine laughs, breaking the tension. Elena glanced at her watch. "I need to get to the ceremony. But I'll be back here tomorrow. Not as an admiral, inspecting her command. As someone who wants to understand how we're implementing the fixes we've started. Chief Webb, I'm putting you in charge of the logistics reform task force we discussed." "Yes, ma'am." I won't let you down. I know you won't. You've been proving that for 19 years. It's about time someone noticed. As she turned to leave, the entire office came to attention again. But this time, something was different in their salutes. The precision was the same, but there was an intensity, a genuine respect that transcended military courtesy. Elena returned each salute individually, making eye contact, acknowledging them as people she'd served alongside, not just subordinates in her chain of command. The parade ground was packed. Over 2,000 sailors stood in formation, their dress uniforms creating a sea of white. Officers lined the front rows. Civilian contractors and base personnel filled designated viewing areas. Local media had cameras positioned around the perimeter. This wasn't just a routine change of command anymore. It was a story. Elena entered from the side of the field, escorted by Captain Harrison and flanked by senior staff members. The band struck up honors, and the formation snapped to attention with a sound like thunder. She walked toward the podium with measured steps, taking in the faces watching her. Some she recognized from her 2 weeks undercover, the guard from the gate, the administrative clerk who'd processed her contractor badge, the maintenance chief she'd met in the motor pool. They all wore expressions of mingled disbelief and dawning respect. The outgoing commanding officer, Captain Robert Mitchell, waited at the podium. He was retiring after 30 years of service. And Elena knew from her investigation that he'd been either incompetent or deliberately ignorant of the corruption happening under his command. Either way, his legacy would now be forever tarnished by what she'd uncovered. Mitchell kept his remarks brief and professional, avoiding any mention of the scandal that had broken the day before. When he handed her the ceremonial orders and the base flag, his jaw was tight, his eyes avoiding hers. Elena accepted the transfer of command, then turned to face the formation. This was the moment where tradition required a speech about honor, mission, and naval heritage. But she'd never been good at reading from a script someone else wrote. 2 weeks ago, she began, her voice carrying across the silent field. I arrived at this base, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, driving a beat-up Honda, with orders that identified me as a contractor. I reported to the supply office. I sat at a desk in the corner. And, for 14 days, I worked alongside sailors who had no idea who I really was. A ripple moved through the formation. Everyone had heard rumors, but this was the first official confirmation. I did this because I needed to see the truth. Not the sanitized version that gets presented to admirals during official visits. Not the carefully curated briefings that make everything look functional. I needed to see what actually happens here when people think no one important is watching. She paused, letting that sink in. What I found was both troubling and inspiring. I found corruption, theft, and criminal negligence at the leadership level. I found systems deliberately broken to facilitate fraud. I found good sailors being blamed for failures that weren't their fault. Her voice hardened. But I also found something else. I found sailors who refused to give up. Chiefs who held the line on integrity even when it cost them personally. Young sailors who stayed late to help each other succeed. Maintainers who kept aircraft flying despite inadequate resources. Pilots who maintained readiness despite being grounded by supply failures. Elena's gaze swept across the formation, making eye contact with specific faces. You kept this base functioning when your leadership failed you. You maintained standards when the system was designed to make you fail. And you did it with honor and dedication that would make any admiral proud. She saw Chief Webb standing at attention in the senior enlisted ranks, his expression fierce with emotion. She saw Rodriguez and Jackson, the young sailors who'd made jokes about her that first day. She saw the guard from the gate, standing so rigid he looked like he might snap. Starting today, that changes. I am going to hold every person in a position of authority on this base, myself included, to the same standard you've been held to. Excellence. Integrity. Honest communication. If systems are broken, we fix them. If people are failing their sailors, they're relieved. If corruption exists, it's prosecuted. No exceptions. No excuses. The morning breeze carried her words across the field, and she could see the formation, responding shoulders, straightening, chins lifting. The posture of people who just heard something they'd been waiting years to hear. I am going to ask a lot of you. I'm going to demand that you maintain the same dedication and competence you've been showing despite impossible circumstances. But here's my promise in return. You will have the resources you need. You will have leadership that listens. You will have a chain of command that values truth over politics. And you will never again wonder whether anyone at the top actually understands what you're dealing with. Elena paused, letting the weight of that promise settle. Because I sat at that desk. I processed those requisitions. I heard your frustrations. I saw the broken systems. And I will never forget what it felt like to be dismissed, underestimated, and told that the problems weren't real. Her voice grew stronger. They were real. You were right. And now we fix it. The silence that followed was profound. 2,000 sailors stood motionless, barely breathing, as if afraid that any movement might break the spell of a commanding officer who actually meant what she said. Then, from somewhere deep in the formation, a single voice called out, "Hoo-yah, Admiral." The Navy battle cry was taken up by others. Within seconds, it rolled across the parade ground like thunder. 2,000 voices shouting their support, their relief, their hope that maybe finally things would actually change. Hoo-yah! Elena felt her throat tighten. In 23 years of service, through combat deployments and command tours, she'd never heard anything quite like this. This wasn't ceremonial cheering. This was genuine, cathartic, the sound of people who'd been carrying impossible weight suddenly believing someone was finally going to help them carry it. She let it continue for several seconds, then raised her hand. The formation fell silent instantly. "One more thing," she said quietly. "I want to recognize specific people who maintained integrity when it would have been easier to quit or look away." Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb stepped forward. Webb's eyes went wide. For a second, he didn't move, clearly not expecting this. Then training took over, and he marched forward, stopping 3 paces from the podium and saluting. Elena returned the salute, then turned to address the formation. For 3 years, Chief Webb documented irregularities in the supply chain. He raised concerns to his chain of command. He was dismissed, ignored, and blamed for problems he didn't create. But he never stopped doing the right thing. He never compromised his integrity. And the evidence he maintained was critical to breaking open the criminal investigation. She turned back to Webb. "Chief, you are hereby promoted to Senior Chief, Petty Officer, effective immediately. You're also appointed as the lead of the Base Logistics Reform Initiative, reporting directly to me." Webb's face worked through a dozen emotions at once. "Ma'am, thank you. Ma'am, thank you for holding the line when no one was watching. Senior Chief, the Navy needs more leaders like you." Webb saluted again, sharply, and Elena could see his hands trembling slightly as he returned to formation. Lieutenant Commander James Parker, Aviation Maintenance. Senior Chief Lisa Torres, Communications. Petty Officer, First Class David Zhang, Security. Step forward. The 3 named sailors emerged from different sections of the formation, all wearing expressions of shock. They formed a line beside Webb. These 4 sailors, Elena continued, formed what they called the Reality Check Committee. They met informally to compare notes about corruption and systemic failures that official channels refused to acknowledge. They documented problems. They supported each other when leadership failed them. They maintained integrity in an environment that punished honesty. She faced them directly. "You are now the core leadership team for base reform initiatives. Each of you will lead efforts in your respective areas to rebuild systems the right way. You have my full authority and my complete backing. If anyone blocks your efforts or retaliates against you, they answer to me personally." The 4 sailors saluted. And Elena saw in their faces the same transformation she'd seen in the supply office earlier. The look of people who'd stopped hoping and suddenly found reason to hope again. "Return to your positions," Elena ordered. As they marched back to formation, she noticed something rippling through the ranks. Sailors were whispering to each other, processing what had just happened. Their new CO hadn't just given a speech. She'd promoted people who'd been punished for doing the right thing. She'd elevated integrity over rank. She'd proven with actions, not just words, that things were different now. Captain Harrison stepped forward with the base flag, presenting it formally. Elena accepted it, feeling the weight of the ceremonial fabric and everything it represented. "I stand before you as the commanding officer of Naval Air Station Oceana," she said. "But I am also the woman who sat in that supply office, who processed requisitions, who heard your struggles firsthand. I will never forget that perspective. And I expect you to remind me of it if I ever do." She turned to face the base headquarters building, where tradition required the new CO to salute. But before she did, she turned back to the formation one more time. "One last thing. That guard at the gate who waved me through without a second glance 2 weeks ago, the one who called me just another admin transfer. I want you to know something. You did your job exactly as you should have. You checked my credentials, confirmed my authorization, and processed me efficiently. That's all anyone should expect. What happened next, me being dismissed and underestimated, that wasn't your fault. It was exactly what I needed to see." She paused, finding the young guard's face in the formation. He looked like he was ready to melt into the ground from embarrassment. "Seaman Rodriguez," she called out, using the name she'd learned from his gate log entries. "After this ceremony, report to my office. You're going to help me design a new base orientation program, one that actually tells the truth about this installation instead of the sanitized version we usually give new personnel." The guard's mouth opened slightly, in shock, but he managed a strangled, "Yes, ma'am." Elena finally rendered the traditional salute to the headquarters building, then turned back to the formation. "Dismissed. Return to your duties. And remember, excellence is not a goal. It's the minimum standard. Let's show the rest of the Navy how it's done." The formation dissolved into controlled movement as sailors broke ranks and began dispersing. But instead of the usual quick exit from a long ceremony, people lingered. Clusters formed as sailors discussed what they'd just witnessed. Senior chiefs gravitated toward Webb to congratulate him. Junior officers sought out Harrison for guidance on what came next. And everywhere, the word spread. The new Admiral wasn't just talking about change. She was already executing it. 3 hours after the ceremony, Elena sat in her new office, the commanding officer's suite on the top floor of the headquarters building, reviewing reports when Captain Harrison entered with a grave expression. "Admiral, we have a situation. Captain Morrison's lawyer is here. He's demanding to speak with you, and he's making noise about filing formal complaints about the investigation." Elena leaned back in her chair. "Send him in." "Ma'am, you might want Jag present for this." "I want Jag listening from the conference room next door," Elena replied. "But I'll meet with the lawyer alone. Sometimes people say more when they think there are no witnesses." Harrison hesitated, then nodded. "I'll set it up." 5 minutes later, a civilian attorney in an expensive suit entered Elena's office. He was mid-50s, with the confident bearing of someone who'd won more cases than he'd lost and knew how to use that record as intimidation. "Admiral Vasquez. I'm Robert Chen, representing Captain Morrison. Thank you for seeing me." "Mr. Chen." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What can I do for you?" Chen settled into the chair with practiced ease, setting his briefcase beside him. "I'll be direct. My client is facing career-ending charges based on an investigation that I believe violated his rights. You conducted an undercover operation without proper authorization, you obtained evidence through deception, and you're now using your position to railroad a decorated officer." Elena's expression didn't change. "Are you finished?" "Hardly. I'm here to inform you that we will be filing formal complaints with the Inspector General, the Judge Advocate General, and congressional representatives. We're also preparing a lawsuit against the Navy for wrongful prosecution. Your little undercover stunt may make for good press, but it's not going to hold up in court. Mr. Chen, I'm going to give you some information that your client apparently didn't share with you." Elena pulled a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to him. That's the authorization letter from the Chief of Naval Operations approving my undercover assessment. It's dated 6 weeks before I arrived here. Everything I did was legal, authorized, and properly coordinated with JAG. Chen opened the folder, his expression flickering as he read the official letterhead and signatures. Second, Elena continued, I didn't obtain evidence through deception. I observed criminal activity while performing legitimate work in the Seton supply office. When I witnessed Captain Morrison falsifying delivery records and approving contracts with vendors who were stealing from the Navy, I documented what I saw. That's not entrapment. That's investigation. You posed as a contractor. I worked as a contractor, using my actual skill set and credentials. The fact that I also happen to be an admiral doesn't invalidate the work I did or the observations I made. Elena's voice remained calm, professional. Third, your client isn't being railroaded. He's being held accountable for criminal conduct that has been documented by NCIS with physical evidence, financial records, communications logs, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Chen's jaw tightened. Admiral, my client has 20 years of service. He's received commendations, promotions, and excellent fitness reports. You're trying to destroy his career based on circumstantial evidence and your own bias. His career is being destroyed by his own choices, Elena replied. He stole from the Navy. He defrauded taxpayers. He undermined the mission capability of this base for personal profit. Those aren't allegations, Mr. Chen. Those are facts supported by $15 million worth of stolen equipment we recovered from a warehouse he was using to facilitate the theft. He maintains his innocence. Then he'll have the opportunity to present his defense at court-martial. Until then, he's under restriction and investigation. That's not bias. That's how military justice works. Chen leaned forward. You realize this is going to become a media circus. My client has supporters, officers who've worked with him, contractors who'll testify to his character. You may have won the first round with your dramatic undercover reveal, but this is far from over. Elena met his gaze steadily. Mr. Chen, I'm going to tell you something in the hope that you'll relay it to your client. I didn't conduct this investigation to destroy anyone's career. I conducted it to protect sailors who were being failed by corrupt leadership. Captain Morrison had every opportunity to serve honorably. He chose a different path. That's your interpretation. That's the evidence. Elena interrupted. And here's what's going to happen next. NCIS will continue their investigation, following every thread, identifying every person involved in this procurement fraud scheme. Your client can cooperate and potentially receive consideration for that cooperation. Or he can fight and face the full consequences of his actions. She paused, her tone softening slightly. I take no pleasure in this. I've spent 23 years in the Navy alongside good officers who serve with honor. Captain Morrison was once one of those officers. Somewhere along the way, he made choices that put him on the wrong side of that line. That's tragic. But it doesn't change what needs to happen next. Chen gathered his folder, his expression hardening. We'll see what a court-martial board thinks about an admiral who goes undercover to entrap junior officers. I look forward to it, Elena replied, because every sailor on this base deserves to see that integrity matters more than rank, that corruption gets prosecuted regardless of who's involved, and that the Navy keeps its promises to hold the line. After Chen left, Captain Harrison entered from the side door connecting to the conference room. JAG was listening. They said you handled that perfectly. Morrison's going to fight, Elena said. He'll try to make this about me instead of about what he did. Let him try. You have the evidence. You have the authorization. And you have the moral high ground. Harrison sat down across from her. Admiral, can I ask you something? Of course. Why'd you really do it? The undercover assignment. You could have just arrived as CO, ordered an investigation, let NCIS handle it. Why put yourself through 2 weeks of being dismissed and mocked? Elena considered the question, Because I needed to understand what it feels like to be powerless in a system that's broken. I've been an admiral for 2 years. Before that, I was a senior captain, a commander, a department head. I've had authority and rank for most of my career. It's easy to forget what it's like to be the person who sees problems but can't fix them. To be dismissed because you don't have enough stripes on your sleeve. She paused, looking out the window at the base below. Every sailor out there has felt that at some point. They've seen something wrong and been told to stay in their lane. They've reported problems and been ignored. They've tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. I needed to remember what that feels like. Because if I'm going to ask them to trust me, to follow me, to believe that things will be different, I need to actually understand what I'm asking them to overcome. Harrison nodded slowly. That's why they responded the way they did at the ceremony. You didn't just tell them you understood. You proved it. Understanding is useless without action, Elena replied. Now comes the hard part. Actually fixing the systems, changing the culture, proving that today wasn't just theater. You'll do it, Harrison said with certainty. If the last 2 weeks proved anything, it's that you don't quit when things get hard. After Harrison left, Elena stood at her window, watching aircraft take off from the flight line. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the tarmac. In the parking lot below, she could see sailors heading home after their duty day. Some walked in groups, talking and laughing. Others walked alone, tired but satisfied. Her phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Richardson. CNN interview request. SecNav wants you to do it. Thoughts? Elena typed back. Will it help the investigation or just feed the media circus? Both. But also shows sailors the Navy stands behind integrity. Then I'll do it. But I talk about the sailors, not myself. Agreed. Friday afternoon. Remote interview from your office. Elena set down her phone and returned to her desk. The stack of paperwork waiting for her was daunting: personnel issues, readiness reports, budget reviews, operational plans. The normal business of commanding a major naval air station. But nothing about this command was going to be normal. Not after what she'd learned. Not after what she'd seen. Not after she'd promised those sailors that things would change. She picked up the first report and began reading, her analytical mind already identifying inefficiencies and potential improvements. This was going to be a long night. But then again, she'd spent the last 2 weeks staying late at a contractor's desk, working through backlogs no one else wanted to touch. At least now she had the authority to actually fix things. 6 months later, Naval Air Station Oceana looked like a different place. Not physically, the buildings were the same. The runways unchanged. The hangars still decades old. But everything else had transformed. The supply office that Elena had worked in as a contractor now ran with clockwork precision. Senior Chief Webb, promoted again after his logistics reforms, became a Navy-wide model, presided over a team that processed requisitions in days instead of months. The backlog that had stretched back years was gone. Aircraft parts arrived when promised. Maintenance schedules were met. More importantly, morale had transformed. Sailors no longer joked cynically about the system being broken. They talked about the Vasquez effect, the way their admiral had proven that speaking truth to power was not only safe, but encouraged. Elena walked through the supply office on a Friday afternoon, wearing her working uniform. No ceremony or announcement. Just a CO checking on her people. Admiral on deck. Someone called, but Elena waved them back to work. As you were. I'm just visiting. She stopped at the desk she'd occupied 6 months ago. A new contractor sat there now, a retired Army sergeant who'd taken the job after leaving active duty. He stood when Elena approached, but she gestured for him to sit. How's it going? She asked. Good, ma'am. Really good. Senior Chief Webb runs a tight ship, but he's fair. Actually explains why things are done certain ways instead of just barking orders. That's because he learned from experience what doesn't work. Elena said, Keep up the good work. She found Webb in his office, working through a presentation for the next logistics conference. He stood when she entered. Admiral. Didn't know you were coming by. That's the point, Senior Chief. I like to see what's actually happening. Not the sanitized version people prepare when they know I'm inspecting. Webb grinned. In that case, you should know that Jackson just solved a requisition problem that's been driving us crazy for 2 weeks. Kid's got a real talent for this work. The same Jackson who bet I'd quit in 10 days? The very same. He's turned into one of my best sailors. Wants to make chief someday. I think he will. Elena felt a surge of satisfaction. That's what I like to hear. People growing, developing, becoming the leaders we need. She left the supply office and walked across the base toward the flight line. This was her favorite time of day, late afternoon, when the training sorties were returning and the base was winding down from the day's operations. A group of junior pilots in flight suits walked past, then did a double take when they recognized her. They snapped to attention and saluted. Elena returned the salute. How was the training today? Lieutenant Sarah Chen, who'd been her wingman years ago and was now a squadron training officer, stepped forward. Outstanding, ma'am. New aircraft are performing beautifully. Maintenance has been flawless, and we're actually ahead of our readiness goals. Music to my ears. Carry on. As the pilots continued on their way, Elena heard one of them say to Chen, "Is it true she really worked in supply as a contractor?" "It's true," Chen replied. "She wanted to see what was actually happening before taking command. Best decision any CO has ever made for this base." Elena smiled to herself and continued walking. In the communications hub, Senior Chief Torres was briefing a group of technicians on new equipment installations. The entire facility had been upgraded. Every piece of aging equipment Elena had documented during her undercover assessment had been replaced. The Navy had fast-tracked the funding after her report made it clear that communications failures were a readiness issue, not just a maintenance inconvenience. Torres saw Elena through the window and came out to meet her. "Admiral, come to see the new gear? Actually, I came to thank you. I read your report on the improvements. 20% increase in reliability, 50% reduction in maintenance hours. That's exceptional work." Torres's face lit up. "It's amazing what happens when you actually have the right equipment and people listen to your recommendations, ma'am. For years, I was told we just had to make do. Now we're setting standards other bases want to copy. That's leadership, Senior Chief. You knew what needed to be done. You just needed someone to listen." As Elena walked back toward headquarters, she passed the motor pool, where Staff Sergeant Cole, now a gunnery sergeant after his maintenance programs had earned Navy-wide recognition, was supervising a group of young Marines working on vehicles. "Admiral," Cole called out, "you've got to see this." Elena detoured into the bay, where Cole gestured proudly at a row of vehicles. "Every single one of these is mission-ready. 0 deadlined vehicles. First time in 8 years we've hit that mark. Outstanding, Gunny. Your team should be proud." "They are, ma'am. And they know why we got here. You gave us the resources and cleared out the corruption that was blocking our supplies. We just did our jobs. That's all I've ever asked," Elena replied. "Keep it up." Back in her office, Elena reviewed the latest reports from NCIS. Captain Morrison's court-martial had concluded 3 weeks ago. He'd been found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, theft, and conduct unbecoming. He was dismissed from service, sentenced to 5 years in military prison, and ordered to pay restitution. 7 other officers across 4 bases had been implicated in the same scheme. All were facing courts-martial. The defense contractor at the center of the fraud had lost all Navy contracts and was under federal investigation. More importantly, the Navy had implemented sweeping reforms to procurement oversight. The system Elena had documented as broken was being rebuilt from the ground up, with accountability measures that made it nearly impossible for similar fraud to occur in the future. Admiral Richardson had called her personally after Morrison's sentencing. "You started this by being willing to work in a supply office for 2 weeks. It's now triggered the largest procurement reform in Navy history. That's leadership, Elena. But Elena's greatest satisfaction came from smaller moments. The young sailor in communications who thanked her for creating an environment where reporting problems was encouraged, not punished. The lieutenant who said he was staying in the Navy because he finally believed his service mattered. The senior chief who told her his sailors actually looked forward to coming to work now. That evening, Elena attended an informal gathering at the chief's mess, a monthly tradition where senior enlisted leadership met to discuss issues and build community. She'd been invited as the guest of honor, though she'd made it clear she was there to listen, not make speeches. Senior Chief Webb stood to address the room. "Before we start, I want to say something about our CO. 6 months ago, we were drowning. Bad leadership, broken systems, morale, in the toilet. A lot of us were counting days until we could retire and get away from this mess." Heads nodded around the room. Then Admiral Vasquez showed up. And before she took command, before she put on those stars, before she had any authority over us, she sat at a desk in my office and did the job none of us wanted to do. She processed requisitions. She stayed late. She listened to us complain. And she saw exactly what we were dealing with. Webb's voice grew stronger. She could have just shown up as Admiral and ordered us to fix things. Instead, she proved she understood what needed fixing by experiencing it herself. That's not just leadership. That's respect. And it's why every chief in this room would follow her anywhere. The assembled chiefs raised their coffee mugs in agreement. "To Admiral Vasquez," Webb called out. "The best CO we've ever had." "To Admiral Vasquez," the room echoed. Elena stood, humbled. "Chiefs, I appreciate that. But I need you to understand something. I didn't fix this base. You did. You were the ones holding the line when leadership failed. You were the ones maintaining standards when the system worked against you. You were the ones who refused to quit even when quitting would have been easier." She paused, making eye contact around the room. "All I did was clear away the obstacles so you could do your jobs properly. The excellence was always here. It was just being suppressed by corruption and incompetence. Now that those barriers are gone, you're showing the rest of the Navy what's possible when good sailors are properly supported." Master Chief Peterson, the base's command master chief, stood. "Admiral, permission to say something?" "Granted. I've been in the Navy 32 years. Served under 23 different commanding officers. You're the only one who ever asked what we actually needed, instead of telling us what you thought we needed. You're the only one who admitted you didn't have all the answers and needed our input. And you're the only one who kept every promise you made." His voice grew thick with emotion. "That matters, ma'am. That matters more than you know. There are sailors on this base who were ready to leave the Navy because they'd lost faith that integrity mattered. You restored that faith. You proved that doing the right thing actually means something." The room erupted in applause. Chiefs standing and clapping until Elena raised her hand for quiet. "Thank you," she said simply. "But the work isn't done. We fixed the immediate crises, but lasting change takes years. I need every one of you to keep holding that line. Keep speaking truth. Keep demanding excellence from everyone, including me. The moment we get comfortable is the moment we start sliding back." "Won't happen, Admiral," Webb said with certainty. "Not on our watch." Later that night, Elena sat in her quarters reviewing the CNN interview that had aired the week before. The reporter had asked predictable questions about the investigation, the undercover operation, the court-martial results. But one question had caught her off guard. "Admiral, some have criticized your methods, saying it's undignified for a flag officer to pose as a contractor. How do you respond?" Elena had looked directly at the camera when she answered, "Dignity isn't about maintaining the appearance of authority. Dignity is about earning respect through honest service. I spent 2 weeks doing honest work alongside sailors who serve this country with dedication every single day. If someone thinks that's beneath an admiral, they've forgotten what wearing this uniform actually means." The interview had gone viral, not because of the scandal, but because of that answer. Sailors across the fleet had shared it, commented on it, used it as proof that at least one flag officer understood what service actually meant. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Richardson. SecNav wants you in DC next month. There, considering your logistics reforms for Navy-wide implementation, might mean a promotion. Elena stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Rather stay here and finish what we started. Oceana needs stability." The reply came quickly. "That's why you're getting promoted. People who prioritize mission over career are exactly who should be making flag rank. See you in DC." Elena set down her phone and walked to her window. Outside, the base was settling into night routine. Lights glowed in the barracks and offices. Security patrols moved along the perimeter. Aircraft sat ready on the flight line, prepared for whatever mission tomorrow might bring. This was why she'd joined the Navy 23 years ago. Not for rank or recognition, but for this, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the people under her command were safe, supported, and able to do their jobs with excellence. The undercover assessment had been a risk. Going against convention, potentially damaging her career, enduring mockery and dismissal, all of it could have backfired spectacularly, but it hadn't. Because the gamble had been based on a simple truth: real leadership requires understanding the reality your people face, not the sanitized version you're comfortable believing. Elena had been willing to see that reality, even when it was uncomfortable. Even when it cost her dignity in the eyes of those who thought admirals should maintain distance from the enlisted ranks. And that willingness, that humility had made all the difference. 1 year after taking command, Elena stood in the same supply office where her journey had begun. The space had been renovated, new computers, better lighting, ergonomic furniture, but more importantly, the atmosphere had changed. Sailors worked with energy and purpose. Laughter was genuine, not cynical. When problems arose, people spoke up immediately instead of covering them up. The culture had transformed from one of resigned dysfunction to one of engaged excellence. A young seaman fresh out of boot camp, barely 18 years old, approached Elena nervously. "Ma'am? I'm Seaman Williams. I just checked in yesterday." "Welcome to Oceana, Williams. How are you finding it so far?" "It's incredible, ma'am. Everyone's been really helpful. And they told me about what you did working here undercover before taking command." "Is that really true?" Elena smiled. "It's true. Why would an admiral do that?" It was the same question Elena had been asked 100 times over the past year. Her answer never changed. Because the best way to understand what your people need is to walk in their shoes. Leadership isn't about authority. It's about service. Williams nodded slowly, processing that. "I hope I can serve like that someday, ma'am." "You already are," Elena replied. "Just by showing up, doing your job with integrity, and caring about the mission. That's what service means." After Williams returned to his desk, Senior Chief Webb approached. "Admiral, I just got word. Our logistics model is being implemented at 3 more air stations next quarter. They're calling it the Oceana Standard." "It's not the Oceana Standard," Elena corrected gently. "It's just how things should have been done all along. We're not inventing excellence. We're just removing the obstacles that prevented it." "Yes, ma'am. But still, it feels good to be the example instead of the cautionary tale." Elena laughed. "I'll drink to that." As she left the supply office for the last time that day, Elena paused at the desk, where she'd sat a year ago. Someone had placed a small plaque on the wall above it. "Admiral E. Vasquez worked here, May 2024. Never underestimate the person beside you." It was unauthorized, probably violated a dozen regulations about office decorations. And Elena loved it. She left it exactly where it was. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from? And who's the quiet leader you'll never forget?